The origins of Pablo Escobar and the birth of the cartel. The story of Pablo Escobar, one of the most infamous criminals in modern history, begins not in a lavish mansion or with a powerful empire, but in the rugged, poor neighborhoods of Medellín, Colombia. The rise of the Medellín Cartel, which would dominate the global cocaine trade in the 1980s, is not just the tale of one man's ambition. It is a story of poverty, opportunity, and the ruthless world of organized crime. But before Escobar became the king of cocaine, before he amassed a fortune that made him one of the richest men in the world, he was a boy from the streets, a product of Colombia's tumultuous political and social climate. Early life in Medellín. Pablo Escobar was born on December 1st, 1949, in the small town of Rio Negro, Antioquia, Colombia, to a poor family. His father, Abel de Jesus Escobar, was a farmer, while his mother, Hermilda Gaviria, was a schoolteacher. From a young age, Escobar exhibited a rebellious streak, one that would define much of his life. Growing up in the outskirts of Medellín, Escobar was exposed to poverty and hardship, living in a society where the divide between the rich and poor was stark and deeply entrenched. Escobar's early life was far from easy. His family struggled financially, and while he did attend school, Escobar found it difficult to stay engaged in formal education. His true ambitions were not rooted in academics, but in achieving wealth and power, something he believed could be obtained through the exploitation of the system. By his teenage years, Escobar was already on a criminal path, involved in petty theft, smuggling, and other illegal activities that set the stage for his future. During his youth, Escobar's passion for wealth was evident. It wasn't long before he started indulging in more sophisticated and dangerous crimes. He began to build a network of associates, and he became known for his knack for business. His entry into the world of crime came in the form of small-scale schemes, such as stealing and selling gravestones and working as a low-level smuggler. However, these small-time crimes would soon grow into something much bigger: the rise to power. The beginnings of cocaine in the late 1970s, the United States was experiencing a surge in demand for illegal drugs, particularly cocaine, which was starting to make its way out of the Andes into the U.S. market. The Colombian countryside, with its ideal growing conditions for coca plants, quickly became the hub for cocaine production. For Escobar, this new market was an opportunity too great to ignore. He recognized that cocaine trafficking was becoming a gold mine, and by the mid-1970s, he had already entered the trade. Escobar's first step in the drug trade was building a network of suppliers who could provide him with the raw material, coca leaves. In the early days, Escobar worked with local farmers to cultivate the coca plants that would later be processed into cocaine. He used the profits from his earlier crimes to fund his operations and expand his reach. Escobar's business acumen was evident as he negotiated with other criminal organizations and suppliers, rapidly increasing his network and influence. One of the critical aspects of Escobar's rise was his willingness to innovate. While other drug lords relied on traditional methods, Escobar sought out new, more efficient ways to produce and transport cocaine. He understood the need for secrecy and discretion, and soon he had a network of laboratories in remote regions of Colombia where the cocaine could be refined. By the late 1970s, Escobar was already smuggling massive quantities of cocaine into the United States, and he quickly began to dominate the trade. The formation of the Medellín Cartel. Pablo Escobar's ambitions were not limited to being a smuggler or a drug dealer. He wanted to control the entire supply chain. By the early 1980s, Escobar had established what would become the Medellín Cartel, a vast network that controlled every aspect of cocaine production and distribution, from cultivation to processing, to transportation and distribution. Escobar's cartel didn't just transport cocaine. It was deeply involved in every part of the drug's journey, from the coca fields of Colombia to the streets of America. He developed a highly organized, militarized structure for his operations, ensuring that all aspects of the cartel were well coordinated. He employed a vast array of workers: cooks, smugglers, pilots, security personnel, and even lawyers, to protect the cartel's interests. Escobar's rise to power in the cartel was swift, and by the early 1980s, the Medellín Cartel was the most dominant force in the global cocaine market. Escobar's network extended across Colombia, through Central America, and into the United States. His operation was so large and so well organized that it was virtually untouchable by law enforcement at the time. The role of violence and corruption as the cartel grew, so did the levels of violence and corruption. Escobar realized that maintaining his empire required not only an extensive network of smugglers, but also the ability to intimidate and eliminate anyone who might threaten his operations. Escobar quickly gained a reputation for being ruthlessly violent. Anyone who crossed him was either killed or terrorized into submission. One of the most notorious aspects of Escobar's reign was his use of bribery and corruption to maintain control. He had politicians, judges, and law enforcement officers on his payroll, which allowed him to operate with impunity. Escobar used his wealth to buy influence at every level of society, ensuring that his criminal activities would not be interfered with. Escobar's reputation for violence was further cemented by his motto, plata o plomo, meaning silver or lead. This meant that people had a choice. They could either take a bribe, silver, or face assassination, lead. This brutal strategy extended not only to his rivals, but also to the police and government officials who attempted to dismantle his empire. Public image and charitable contributions. Despite his ruthless methods, Escobar worked hard to maintain a positive image in certain circles, particularly in Medellín. He presented himself as a benefactor to the poor, building homes, schools, and soccer fields for the city's most impoverished residents. Escobar's public image as a modern-day Robin Hood made him popular among the people of Medellín, who saw him as a figure who was giving back to the community. Escobar used his wealth to gain the loyalty of the public, knowing that their support would help shield him from law enforcement and political pressure. He funded numerous community projects, built low-income housing, and even offered financial support to local soccer clubs. His popularity among the lower class helped cement his status in Medellín, and his image as a generous benefactor allowed him to operate with relative freedom. However, this image of benevolence was a carefully crafted facade. Beneath the charity and the goodwill, Escobar remained a ruthless criminal, willing to do anything to maintain his grip on power. The contrast between his public persona and the reality of his criminal empire was stark, but it was this duality that made him so dangerous and unpredictable. The global cocaine trade. As Escobar's Medellín cartel flourished, so did the global demand for cocaine. The 1980s saw the rise of a new drug culture in the United States, with cocaine becoming a symbol of excess and luxury. Escobar capitalized on this demand, and soon his cartel was supplying over 70% of the cocaine that entered the U.S. market. The profit margins were astronomical, and Escobar's wealth skyrocketed, placing him among the richest men in the world. Escobar's empire was vast. He had networks in every corner of the globe, from Latin America to the United States, and even Europe. He built an extensive transportation network that included planes, boats, and even submarines to smuggle cocaine into the U.S. His distribution network reached all the way to Miami, where the demand for cocaine was especially high. By the mid-1980s, Escobar's wealth was estimated at over $3 billion, making him one of the wealthiest men in the world. He lived a life of luxury, with numerous properties, private jets, and a personal zoo, but the true scale of his empire was impossible to comprehend. Escobar's global reach and his ability to avoid capture for so long were a testament to his power, influence, and ruthlessness. The creation of an empire. By the time Escobar had solidified control over the Medellín cartel, his influence had grown beyond the drug trade. He became deeply involved in politics, using his wealth and power to push his agenda. In 1982, Escobar ran for a seat in the Colombian Congress, further cementing his political ambitions. While his campaign was a success, it was short-lived, as he was eventually forced to resign after his criminal activities became too well known to ignore. Escobar's reach extended far beyond Colombia. He expanded his operations into other parts of Latin America, Europe, and even Asia. The Medellín cartel became a global operation, trafficking cocaine to every corner of the world. By the mid-1980s, Escobar was a household name, feared by governments and law enforcement agencies across the globe. His empire was a well-oiled machine, generating billions of dollars in revenue each year. Escobar's wealth and power made him nearly untouchable, and he seemed to operate with impunity. However, as the cartel's reach expanded, so did the number of people who sought to bring him down. What began as a small, regional smuggling operation had transformed into a global criminal enterprise that would ultimately bring about Escobar's downfall. Escobar's control over Colombia was so extensive that he was able to intimidate or outright eliminate anyone who stood in his way. His reach extended into the political sphere, where he forged strategic alliances with local politicians, businessmen, and even other cartels. He wielded influence not only in Colombia but across Latin America, and his empire stretched to the United States, Mexico, Europe, and beyond. The consequences of power. While Escobar's power seemed unstoppable, his arrogance and the excesses that came with it eventually led to his downfall. Escobar's decision to pursue a political career with the aim of securing immunity from prosecution would ultimately backfire. In 1982, he was elected to Colombia's Congress as an alternative to his violent dealings, presenting himself as a political reformer. However, his criminal activities, including drug trafficking, were well known, and his political involvement only served to expose the extent of his criminal empire. It was also around this time that Escobar's violent approach to securing power began to alienate many former allies. In the late 1980s, Escobar's war with the Colombian government escalated. He declared a brutal campaign of violence, targeting not only government officials but also innocent civilians, journalists, and anyone who dared challenge him. This violence reached its peak with the bombing of Avianca Flight 203 in 1989, which resulted in the deaths of over 100 people, including several government officials. The bombing was a clear demonstration of Escobar's willingness to do anything to assert his power, and it marked a turning point in the war against the Medellín Cartel. The hunt begins. Escobar's growing list of enemies, both within Colombia and internationally, began to come together to oppose him. The U.S. government, frustrated by Escobar's growing influence, began to take more aggressive action against the cartel, dispatching agents from the DEA, FBI, and CIA to assist Colombia in its efforts to bring down Escobar. At the same time, the Colombian government, led by President Cesar Gaviria, took an increasingly hardline approach, pushing for Escobar's capture. The Colombian government enacted the extradition treaty, a law that allowed drug lords and criminals to be extradited to the U.S. to stand trial. This was Escobar's breaking point. He had always considered himself above the law, and the idea of being tried in the United States was unacceptable to him. In retaliation, Escobar launched a violent campaign against the Colombian government, including the infamous Death to Kidnappers campaign, which targeted government officials, judges, and police officers. He also began to escalate his war against the rival Cali cartel, which had been steadily gaining power in Colombia. The pressure was mounting on Escobar, and in 1991, he was finally cornered. To avoid being extradited, Escobar negotiated a deal with the Colombian government. In exchange for surrendering, he was allowed to build his own prison, known as La Catedral, which would offer him a luxurious environment and even control over the drug trade from behind bars. The illusion of safety. La Catedral was supposed to be a temporary solution to end the conflict between Escobar and the Colombian government. But Escobar quickly began to exploit the system. From inside the prison, he continued to run the Medellín Cartel, while simultaneously using his position to engage in criminal activities, including the murder of those who threatened his empire. His control over the prison was so strong that the guards and officials in charge of the facility were loyal to him, essentially making La Catedral a fortress for Escobar. Escobar's prison break in 1992 marked a pivotal moment in his downfall. As the Colombian government grew frustrated with his continued criminal activities from within La Catedral, they decided to move him to a more secure facility. However, Escobar wasn't about to let that happen. Using his extensive resources and network of contacts, Escobar orchestrated a daring escape, fleeing La Catedral with a group of loyal followers and leaving behind a trail of chaos in his wake. The final chase, with Escobar now on the run, the hunt for him became a global effort. The Colombian government, with the support of the United States and other international law enforcement agencies, launched an all-out manhunt to capture or kill the man who had terrorized the country for years. Escobar's escape signified the beginning of the end for the Medellín Cartel. Escobar's days as a free man were numbered. He lived in hiding, constantly moving from one safe house to another, relying on his loyal followers to shield him from the authorities. His once immense empire was now crumbling, with rival cartels, law enforcement agencies, and even his former associates turning against him. The final chapter of Escobar's story took place in December 1993, when he was tracked down by the Search Block, a special unit of the Colombian National Police. In a dramatic confrontation, Escobar was cornered on a rooftop in Medellín, where he was fatally shot in a firefight with the police. His death marked the end of an era for the Medellín Cartel, and the power of the drug trade in Colombia began to shift toward the Cali cartel, which would soon become the dominant force in the cocaine industry. The aftermath, the legacy of Escobar's fall. Escobar's death did not mark the end of drug violence in Colombia, nor did it end the Medellín cartel's influence immediately. Despite his death, his legacy lived on in the criminal world. His family, his closest associates, and remnants of the Medellín cartel's operations continued to operate in the shadows. But the end of Escobar's reign marked a shift in the way the Colombian government and international law enforcement viewed the war on drugs. The pursuit of Escobar had shown that even the most powerful criminal organizations could be brought down, albeit at a great cost. His death also led to a period of destabilization within the drug trade, as smaller cartels fought for control of the lucrative cocaine market. The fall of Escobar was not just a victory for law enforcement. It was a stark reminder that the consequences of a life built on violence, betrayal, and greed are ultimately fatal. Escobar's empire crumbled because of his own hubris, his inability to adapt to changing times, and the relentless pursuit of justice that he could not escape. The lessons of Pablo Escobar's downfall. Why crime doesn't pay. Pablo Escobar's story is one of incredible highs and devastating lows. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of power, greed, and the belief that one can escape the consequences of their actions. Escobar built an empire that spanned continents and touched nearly every part of society. But in the end, he was betrayed by his own arrogance and his insatiable desire for control. His life serves as a powerful reminder that crime doesn't pay, not in the long term. For those who believe that a life of crime can bring wealth and power, Escobar's story proves otherwise. His rise to power was fueled by violence and terror, and his eventual fall was a result of his inability to escape the consequences of his actions. Escobar's empire may have been vast, but in the end, it was nothing more than a house of cards, doomed to collapse under the weight of its own corruption and brutality. If you're tempted by the allure of easy money and power, remember this. Escobar's fall shows that no matter how high you rise, the inevitable crash will always come. A life built on crime only leads to destruction, whether it's the loss of freedom, the lives of innocent people, or your own life in the end. Avoid the life of crime. Choose a path of integrity, hard work, and respect for others. The consequences of a criminal life are far greater than any material wealth or fleeting power. The fall of a kingpin like Pablo Escobar is a testament to this truth, and it's a story that should be remembered by all who seek to build their lives on the wrong foundation.